The needle hovered a quarter-inch above the scar on Dmitry Volkov's throat, and 6 armed men in that small tattoo shop stopped breathing at the same time. The machine buzzed like a trapped wasp. The air smelled of green soap and witch hazel, and the burnt sugar ghost of the coffee Sasha had abandoned 2 hours ago. When her gloved thumb pressed down on the ruined skin below his jaw, stretching it flat, the man by the door actually drew his gun, and Dmitry Volkov, the most feared mafia boss on the eastern seaboard, the man whose scars made hardened killers look at the floor, raised one finger without opening his eyes. The gun went away. The needle came down. And the plus-size tattoo artist everyone had laughed at 3 weeks earlier leaned close to the throat that a fire had tried to take, and began to turn the worst night of his life into art. But to understand how we got here, you have to go back 3 weeks to a gallery party in the arts district, and a woman being humiliated in front of 200 strangers. Sasha Bell was 38 years old, and she had learned a long time ago that rooms like this one had a way of deciding what she was before she opened her mouth. The Orlova Gallery was all white marble and cold light, and she stood at her portable station near the coat check where they had put her, with her flash sheets laid out and her machine wrapped and ready. She had been hired to do small tattoos for the party guests. Fine line stars, little snakes, a lily behind an ear. Novelty entertainment, the email had called it. She had said yes because the fee was $1,400, and $1,400 was her mother's dialysis copay for October and half of November. She had done 9 tattoos in 3 hours. Her lower back ached in the specific way it always ached, and she was thinking about her son Milo, 8 years old, home with the neighbor, probably asleep sideways across his bed with his sneakers still on, when Katya Orlova came across the marble floor with a champagne flute and a photographer trailing behind her. Katya was the kind of beautiful that had a temperature. Ice blonde, gym-carved, dressed in white silk that moved like poured milk. She stopped in front of Sasha's station, looked her up and down slowly, deliberately, the way you'd examine a stain on a rug, and said, loudly enough to carry, "Oh no, this won't work. I asked the agency for someone photogenic. The pictures from tonight go in a magazine, sweetheart. I can't have you in them looking like the catering got loose." A few people laughed. That polished, sideways laugh people do when they want the credit for cruelty without the blame. Sasha kept her face still. She had a lot of practice keeping her face still. "I've done 9 pieces tonight," she said. "Your guests seem happy, and I'm sure they were very brave about it." Katya set her empty flute on Sasha's clean work surface, on the sterile field, like it was a bus station table. "You can go. We'll mail the check, or, you know what, let's call it exposure. This event is exposure." She smiled with all her teeth. "God knows you've had enough exposure to the buffet." More laughter. Sasha's hands did not shake as she broke down her station, because a tattoo artist's hands are the last thing she is allowed to let shake. But her ears were roaring, and she was doing the math she was always doing. $1,400 gone. Rent on the shop 19 days late. The envelope she mailed to her mother in Dayton every month, the one where she wrote a joke on the inside of the flap, because her mother always checked. She packed her machine into its case. She wiped down the surface Katya had contaminated, because standards are standards even when no one is paying for them. And that was when she noticed the man by the far wall. She noticed him because everyone else was working so hard not to. He stood alone in a room of 200 people, a bubble of empty marble around him 10 feet in every direction, like the crowd was water and he was oil. Dark suit, dark hair, going iron at the temples. And scars. The left side of his neck and jaw was a landscape of old burn scarring, rippled and pale, running down past his collar, and the guests were performing an elaborate ballet of not looking at it, eyes sliding off him like rain off glass. Sasha looked, not at him, at the scars, and her first thought, her honest, involuntary, professional first thought was, someone debrided that badly. Whoever did his grafts rushed the border along the jaw. That could have healed so much softer. He caught her looking. Most people, caught, would have flushed and glanced away. Sasha held his gaze for 1 second, gave him the small, polite nod you give a stranger whose dog is well behaved, and went back to packing her case. She did not know that Dmitri Volkov had just experienced something he had not felt in 11 years. She did not know that grown men wet themselves in warehouses when he looked at them like that. She only knew her feet hurt, and the bus came at 11:40, and Milo needed lunch money for the field trip. She was gone before he could cross the room. Sasha's shop was called Second Skin, and it sat between a shuttered laundromat and a check-cashing place on Delancey, with a hand-painted sparrow on the window that Milo had helped her outline when he was 6, which is why one wing was noticeably bigger than the other. She had never fixed it. She was never going to fix it. 6 days a week, she did walk-ins and appointments. On Sundays, the shop was closed to the public, and she did the other work. The work that didn't go on her Instagram. Paramedical tattooing, areola restoration for women after mastectomies, scar camouflage for burn survivors, for self-harm scars, for the man who came in every year on the anniversary of his motorcycle accident to have another few inches of the wreckage on his shoulder turned into koi and chrysanthemums. She had trained for it twice over. Once in a nursing program, she'd had to quit in her last year when Milo's father left and the money ran out. And once, before all of that, during the strangest, best year of her life, in the back room of a Yokohama studio, as the only foreign apprentice a 70-year-old master named Horimasa ever took. He had taught her to work by hand, tebori, the old way. He had taught her Japanese by refusing to speak anything else. He had taught her that skin remembers everything, and that the artist's job is to argue with its memory. Sunday work paid in casseroles and thank-you cards more often than money. She did it anyway, which is how, 11 days after the gallery party, an elderly woman in a headscarf and enormous sunglasses appeared at the locked door of Second Skin. Having arrived, Sasha would later realize, by walking 6 blocks from wherever she had made her driver drop her so she would not be followed. "You are the one?" the woman said, in an accent that put its weight on the wrong syllables. "Who fixes what the surgeons leave?" Her name, she said, was Vera. Just Vera. She was somewhere north of 70, elegant the way old porcelain is elegant, and when she was gowned and settled in the chair and the surgical drape came away, Sasha saw the double mastectomy scars, 4 years healed, and the flat, blank territory where the surgeons had rebuilt the shape of her, but not the fact of her. "My son does not know I am here," Vera said, staring at the ceiling. "My son thinks I have made peace with it. I let him think so. He has enough war." "You don't have to explain anything to me," Sasha said, mixing pigment, holding the little cap against Vera's skin tone, adjusting, holding it again. "But if you want to talk, I've heard everything. And if you want to sit here for 2 hours and complain about your son, that's traditional." Vera laughed, a short, surprised bark, and something in her shoulders came down 1/2 inch. Sasha worked. 3-dimensional areola restoration is slow, close, intimate work, shading a trompe-l'oeil in flesh tones, giving back with ink what a knife took. 40 minutes in, Vera was telling her about a house with a plum tree. An hour in, Vera had gone quiet, and Sasha, without thinking about it, without even noticing she was doing it, began to hum. A low, looping, minor key melody. An old thing. The thing her hands hummed when they were working well. That was when the front door of Second Skin came off its hinges. It did not open. It came off, kicked, and 4 large men in dark coats filled the shop like floodwater, and behind them, ducking under his own doorframe of ruined hinges, came the scarred man from the gallery. "Mama," Dmitri Volkov said, and his voice was terrible, low and flat. The voice of a man who had spent 4 hours believing his mother had been taken. "You turned off your phone. You left Anton at the market. Do you understand what I thought? Do you understand what is happening right now on 3 streets of this city? Because I thought—" "Stop." Sasha did not raise her voice. She did not stand up. She kept her needle hand exactly where it was, steady above Vera's skin, and put her free hand up, palm out, the way you'd stop traffic. Everybody stop moving. Right now, 4 armed men stopped moving. It would have been funny if any of them had thought it was funny. "This is a sterile procedure," Sasha said, in the voice she'd learned in a hospital and perfected on flinching teenagers getting their first tattoo. "You kicked the door in on a sterile procedure. Your mother is gowned, she is mid-session, and every second that door stands open, I'm fighting airborne contamination. So here's what happens next. One of you picks that door up and leans it in the frame. You," she looked directly at Dmitri Volkov, at the eyes that emptied rooms, "sit in that chair by the window, be quiet, and let me finish. You can be furious in 40 minutes. She's not going anywhere. Neither am I." The shop was silent, except for the hum of the machine and the tick of the radiator. Later, Lev, the bodyguard who had drawn his weapon, would tell the story in a bar to men who did not believe him. "She pointed at him," Lev would say, "like a schoolteacher." And he sat. Dmitri Volkov sat. He sat for 40 minutes in a plastic chair meant for nervous boyfriends, in a struggling tattoo shop that smelled of green soap and pigment, and watched a woman he had been unable to find for 11 days, because she had no agency, no manager, no searchable footprint except a shop account that mostly posted other people's healed work. He watched her hands. He watched his mother's face, which had a looseness in it he had not seen since before the diagnosis. And he heard, though the humming had stopped when the door broke, the last 2 bars of a melody that hit him somewhere under his sternum like a fist, though he could not, in that moment, say why. When it was done, when Vera had cried a little into a paper towel and looked in the hand mirror for a long, long time and said something in Russian that made 2 of the armed men study their shoes, Sasha snapped off her gloves and finally turned to face the most dangerous man in the city. "Okay," she said. "Now you can be furious. Also, you owe me a door." He looked at her for a moment. Then Dmitri Volkov did something Lev had witnessed perhaps 3 times in 15 years. The scarred corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. The rumor of one. "You were at Orlova's gallery," he said. "She refused to pay you." Word travels. I was standing 20 feet away. He glanced at the sparrow on the window, the one lopsided wing. "You looked at me. Lots of people look at you, I'd imagine." "No," he said, "they don't." He came back 2 days later, alone, at closing time, with a new door in the bed of a truck he drove himself, which she would learn was extraordinary, and a proposition that was really a test. He sat in her chair, and he took off his shirt, and he watched her face, because he had done this exact thing twice before in 11 years. Once with a surgeon in Geneva, who had maintained a professional mask 1 degree too rigid, and once with a woman he had planned to marry, who had looked at the full map of him, the burns down his neck and shoulder and ribs, the knife scars, the 2 puckered gunshot healings, the whole written history of a violent life and 1 catastrophic fire, and whose face had done a thing she probably thought she hid. Sasha looked at his scars the way a river pilot looks at a river. She walked around him. She touched the burn field on his shoulder without asking permission, pressing, testing pliability. And her touch was neither tender nor cruel. It was competent, and something about that competence closed his throat. She talked to him the whole time, half to herself. This graft border could soften with needling before any pigment. This tissue would hold ink. That tissue wouldn't. They'd design around it, make the ridge line part of the drawing, mountains maybe, or a wave, the scar becoming the white cap. Skin remembers everything, she said. We're not going to erase anything. Erasing is a lie, and lies heal badly. We're going to make it say something true on purpose. Then she stopped. Her fingers had found the newest mark, low on his left side below the ribs, and her voice changed completely. This is 2 weeks old. It's been stitched by an amateur, and it's infected. You have a fever right now. Don't tell me you don't. I can feel it in your skin. Sit still. It's nothing. It's handled. It's cellulitis is what it is, and in another week it's a hospital stay, which I'd guess is inconvenient for a man who drives his own truck, so nobody knows where he is. She was already pulling supplies, saline, iodine, gloves. Who stitched this? A friend with a fishing kit? Something like that. Your friend is an idiot. Shirt stays off. This will hurt. It did hurt. He didn't move. She cleaned and packed the wound with hands that had done wound care on night shifts before her life collapsed, and Dmitri Volkov stared at the ceiling of second skin and understood 2 things with total clarity. The first was that this woman had just found, in 90 seconds, the wound his entire organization had failed to notice was killing him slowly. The second was that he was going to invent reasons to come back here for the rest of his life. He proposed the contract before he left. Weekly sessions. A full reworking of the burn field, neck to ribs, her design, her pace, months of work. The number he named was so large, she laughed at him, an actual startled laugh, and told him the real market rate, and he learned that she couldn't be overpaid, which unsettled him more than anything, because money was the only language he was fluent in, and she was politely declining to speak it. So he found the other language. The next week, her landlord, who had been circling the block's leases like a gull, abruptly sold the building. The week after that, a deed arrived at Second Skin in a plain envelope, and the name on it was not Volkov Holdings. It was Sasha Bell. She marched into his office, past 3 layers of men who had been given very specific instructions not to stop her, dropped the deed on his desk and said, "I can't accept a building." "It isn't for you," Dmitri said, not looking up from his papers. "There's a boy who painted a sparrow on that window. His mother's shop shouldn't exist at a landlord's pleasure. Argue with me about something else." She stood there for a moment. On his desk, in a chipped mug that said, "World's okayest fisherman," a mug that had no business existing in that office, were pens and 1 plum, and she would wonder about both for weeks. "The wing is crooked," she finally said, "on the sparrow. He was 6. "I know," Dmitri said. "It's the best thing on that street?" She kept the building. She never told him that she cried on the bus. The sessions became the architecture of both their weeks. Tuesday nights, after close, his men outside pretending not to eat from the taco truck that had learned their schedule, and Dmitri Volkov in the chair, shirt off, while Sasha worked the burn field with needles and no pigment at first, softening scar tissue session by session, then line work, a great wave building across his shoulder in the old Japanese style Horimasa had beaten into her hands, the ruined skin becoming foam and current, the story of the fire becoming a story about water. And piece by piece, never all at once, never as a speech, the fire itself surfaced. She learned it the way you learn a coastline in fog. One night, holding still under the needle, he said his brother's name, Nikolai, and nothing else, and she didn't ask. 3 sessions later, wiping ink from the graft border, she said, "You went in through a window." Not a question, because the pattern of the burns had told her that months ago, the way they wrapped the left side, the way his forearms were sod, where sleeves had been soaked, and he was quiet so long she thought she'd broken something. And then he said, twice the second time the ceiling was already down. Another night, much later, the fire had been set. Another night, later still, almost inaudible under the buzz. The man who ordered it had been his own uncle, and the empire Dmitri ran now was the one he had taken from him, at 19, with the grafts still weeping. She never once said she was sorry. She said things like, "Hold still, this section's tender," and turned the worst of it, the deep ridge where the beam had come down across his shoulder, into the crest of the wave, the exact point where the water in the drawing gathered all its power. He learned her the same way, that she checked the lock on Milo's school pickup list like a ritual, that she mailed an envelope to Dayton on the 1st of every month and wrote a joke inside the flap, that when her hands were happiest, she hummed, always the same looping minor key thing, and every time she did it, something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't read, and once he said quietly, "Where is that song from?" And she said, "I honestly don't know. It's just always been in there." And he didn't ask again. The sweetness came braided with the other thing, because his world did not pause for Tuesday nights. Katya Orlova had noticed. Katya, it turned out, was not merely a gallery owner. She was the woman who had once worn Dmitri Volkov's ring 12 years ago, before the fire, and had given it back 11 years ago, after, and had spent the decade since building a gallery on the money and connections of the world he ran, telling herself a story about that decision that required, structurally, that no one ever replace her. The first move was small, a health department inspection, anonymous complaint that shut Second Skin for 9 days in a month, when 9 days mattered. The second was a whisper campaign, screenshots in the right group chats, that fat con artist on Delancey scarred a client. There's a lawsuit. Pass it on. Sasha lost 4 bookings in a week, and never knew why. The third move was Japan, and it backfired so badly it became legend. Dmitri had spent a year courting the Sato organization, a port arrangement worth more than everything else he did combined, and the final dinner was arranged at a private restaurant, and Katya, still socially wired into his world, made sure a rumor reached the Sato delegation that Volkov had gone soft, disfigured and sentimental, keeping some tattooist mistress. So Dmitri did the thing no one expected. He brought Sasha to the dinner, openly, introduced her as the artist reworking his Irezumi, which was a word choice, and a deliberate one. The Oyabun, Sato, a compact man of about 65 with the stillness of deep water, studied Sasha with polite, dismissive courtesy, and made a remark to his second in Japanese, not unkind, merely dismissive, to the effect that Americans thought a tattoo machine and a business card made an artist, and that it was a shame Volkov's taste in art didn't match his taste in war. And Sasha set down her tea, and replied in Japanese. Fluent, Yokohama-accented, working-class, politeness Japanese, the exact register of a shop apprentice. And what she said was that the Oyabun was of course correct about most Americans, and that she hoped he would forgive her presumption. But she couldn't help noticing the edge of the piece at his wrist, and if she was not mistaken, the shading style was Horimasa of Yokohama. The way he pulled gradation with hand tools, no one else's black settled that softly. And was the master's shoulder still troubling him? Because in her year, sweeping his floor and mixing his ink, it had already begun to ache in the cold. The silence that followed lasted 11 full seconds. Lev counted. Then Sato pushed up his sleeve, laid his forearm on the table, an intimacy roughly equivalent to a state secret, and said in English to Dmitri, "Your artist swept Horimasa's floor." And to Sasha, in Japanese, with an entirely different bow of the head. He speaks of his foreign apprentice still, the one who hummed. He says her hands listened. The port deal closed that night. It closed, everyone present understood, at that table, at that sentence. On the drive home, Dmitri looked at her for a long moment and said, "Is there a bottom to you?" And Sasha, exhausted, running on adrenaline and green tea, said, "Yeah, it's about $2 above my checking balance." And he laughed, actually laughed, a rusty sound like a gate that hadn't moved in years. And in the front seat, Lev gripped the wheel and stared at the road, like a man witnessing a religious event. Katya heard about the dinner within a day. And here is the thing about Katya Orlova that even Katya did not like to look at directly. 11 years ago, in a burn unit hallway that smelled of silver sulfadiazine and scorched hair, a 26-year-old Katya had stood outside Dmitri's room for 4 hours and been unable to make herself go in. She had gone in, finally, and seen the left side of him, and her face had done the thing. And every cruelty since, every year of it, had been a courtroom where she was both defendant and judge, endlessly retrying the case. Because if Dmitri Volkov was a monster whose world ruined everything it touched, then leaving had been survival. But if he was a man who could be loved, scars and all, by anyone at all, then what she had done in that hallway had a different name. And now, a fat tattoo artist from Delancey Street was, session by session, publicly proving the second thing. So Katya stopped playing. It happened on a Tuesday, of course. Dmitri was flying back from the coast. The session pushed to Wednesday. And Sasha was alone in the shop at 9 at night, finishing a stencil when the lights of a van washed across the sparrow in the window. The men who came in were not Dmitri's. They were barren crew, dockside muscle from the organization that had lost the Sato deal, and they had been given, by an anonymous and well-manicured hand, 3 things: the shop's address, the session schedule, and photographs, taken through that window with a long lens, of Volkov shirtless and unguarded in a tattoo chair, proof of a soft place, proof of where the untouchable man took his armor off. They took her, because taking her was taking him. She spent 19 hours in a cold room at the docks that smelled of diesel and rope and old fish blood, and she survived it the way she had survived everything, by being useful and by paying attention. When the youngest of them came back from a botched job elsewhere, with his forearm opened up and his friends debating a bar towel and vodka, she talked them, in the flat school-teacher voice, into boiling water and a clean shirt and letting her close the wound properly. And by hour 10, the young one was sneaking her coffee. And by hour 15, he had told her, without meaning to, exactly how they'd known where she'd be. A schedule, a woman's handwriting, cream-colored paper the kind with a deckled edge. Gallery paper. What Dmitri Volkov did in those 19 hours entered the permanent folklore of the city, and most of it can't be repeated here. It is enough to say that the Baron organization, which had existed for 30 years, ceased to exist as a functioning entity in a single night, that its leadership presented themselves to Dmitri unarmed before dawn, out of a sudden overwhelming preference for negotiation, and that when the cold room's door opened, it was Dmitri who came through it first, ahead of his own men, which violated every protocol he had ever written, and that the plus-size woman on the crate stood up and said, "Your timing's terrible, I just got the coffee kid trained," and that the most feared man on the eastern seaboard crossed the room and held on to her like the building was burning. He found the schedule in the crew boss's coat. Cream paper, deckled edge. The Orlova Gallery's winter benefit was 11 days later. 240 guests, the same marble, the same cold light, and Katya Orlova in oxblood silk at the top of the room. And if her smile was tighter than usual, only she knew why. Because the barons had gone silent, and the tattoo artist had, infuriatingly, not been in the papers, not been found floating, not been anything. The room hummed. The photographer circled. Dmitri Volkov arrived at 9, unannounced, uninvited, and unaccompanied, except for Sasha Bell on his arm in a deep green dress, and Lev carrying a slim leather folder. The room did what rooms did. It parted. Dmitri. Katya's voice carried beautifully. She had always been good at rooms. This is a surprise, and you've brought your project. I've brought 2 things, Dmitri said, and his voice was the cold, flat one, the warehouse voice, and every conversation in the gallery died in place. The first is an invoice, $1,400. This woman worked in this room for 3 hours, 11 months ago, and you refused to pay her in front of your guests because of the shape of her body. So, he nodded at Lev, who opened the folder. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, I own this building, the 2 adjoining it, and the note on your gallery. Your landlord was motivated. The invoice will be settled tonight with interest, and the interest is that every person in this room is going to hear the rest. The rest was the schedule. The photographs, the cream paper with the deckled edge, sealed now in an evidence sleeve, and beside it, a handwriting analysis, and beside that, a signed statement from a dockside crew boss with a sudden preference for negotiation. Lev read none of it aloud. He simply handed the folder to the district attorney's wife, who was standing near the front, and who had, everyone knew, no discretion whatsoever. Which was the point. You gave men my schedule, Dmitri said quietly, knowing what they'd do with it. She has a son, Katya. He's 8. And the room watched Katya Orlova's face come apart in layers, the smile, then the composure under it, then the anger under that, and then, at the very bottom, something almost no one there had the eyes to recognize. But Sasha did, because Sasha's whole life was reading damage. It was grief. Old grief, 11 years old, the kind that has been fed and housed and dressed up as contempt for so long it has forgotten its own name. Katya looked at Sasha, really looked for the first time, past the body she'd mocked, at the woman. Her eyes went to Dmitri's collar, where the top of the finished wave showed above the shirt line, ink and scar moving together like they'd been born together. I saw it, Katya said, and her voice was suddenly small, wrong for the room, a hallway voice. The photographs those idiots took, the tattoo. She swallowed. It's beautiful. I stood outside his door for 4 hours once and I couldn't even look. You looked. So. A breath, and the smile tried to reassemble and failed. Take the gallery. It was built on his money anyway. Everything I have is built on the thing I ran away from. That's the joke. That was always the joke. She set down her glass, carefully, on a clean surface this time, and walked out through her own crowd, alone, with her spine straight, and no one laughed. And somehow that was worse for her than laughter. And Sasha, who had every right to enjoy it, found that she didn't quite. Catharsis, she thought, watching the oxblood silk disappear. Tastes less like sugar than everyone tells you. It tastes like iodine. It's what cleaning a wound tastes like. Then Dmitri turned to face her in front of 240 people, and the night stopped being about Katya at all. There's a third thing, he said. His hand went into his jacket, and Lev straightened like a man who knew what was in the pocket, and Sasha's heart went off its rhythm. But what Dmitri took out was not a ring box, it was his phone. He touched the screen, and through the gallery's speakers, which his people had owned for 6 hours along with the building, came a recording. Hospital sounds, faint. A heart monitor. And a woman humming, low and looping, a minor key melody going around and around. Sasha's own hum. Her exact hum. Except the recording hissed with age, and the voice in it was younger. 11 years ago, Dmitri said, to her, only to her, though the whole room hung on it. There was a burn unit at St. Anthony's and a debridement schedule, which is a polite word for the worst pain a body can experience, and my eyes were bandaged for 9 weeks, so I never saw faces. There was a nursing student on nights. The other staff wore double gloves with me, because of who I was. She didn't. She held my hand through every debridement, and she hummed, because I asked her once what the sound was, and she said she didn't even know she was doing it. My uncle's lawyers pulled me out of that hospital in the middle of a night shift, and I never learned her name. I had my people search for 2 years. A humming nursing student who left the program. Nothing. His voice, the one that emptied warehouses, cracked like river ice. My mother recorded that on her old phone, in the hallway, because she said the sound was keeping me alive and she wanted to keep it too. I have listened to it every bad night for 11 years. And 8 months ago, a woman in a tattoo shop told my mother to sit still and started to hum. The room made a sound like a wave pulling back over stones. Sasha stood in the cold light with her hand over her mouth, and the math she was always doing collapsed into a single memory. Night shift, the burned man with the bandaged eyes whose chart said, "No next of kin, permitted." The one she'd been written up for spending too long with, the semester she withdrew, the life that broke and reformed around a baby and a needle and a lopsided sparrow, and all of it, had been circling back to this marble room. "You held my hand when I was a monster in the dark," Dmitri Volkov said, and now the box did come out of the pocket, and the most feared man on the eastern seaboard went down on one knee on Katya Orlova's marble floor, scars catching the light, in front of a crowd that 11 months ago had laughed. "I have been trying to pay a $1,400 invoice all night. I will be trying to pay this other debt for the rest of my life. Marry me, Sasha. Not for the buildings. I'll put every deed in Milo's name tomorrow, and you can turn me down clean." "You idiot," Sasha said, crying, laughing. "I'd have taken the 1,400. And then she said yes, and the room that had once laughed at her came to its feet, and the applause went on so long that the caterers came out of the kitchen to see, and Vera Volkovova, who had known for months, who had walked 6 blocks in sunglasses to make sure of this woman before her son ever found her. stood by the coat check where Sasha's little station had once been, and did not clap, just pressed both hands to her restored, reclaimed, tattooed heart, and mouthed something in Russian that made her son look away before his face could betray him in public. The wedding was small, which surprised the city. The reception was at a taco truck, which surprised no one who mattered. And on a Tuesday evening the following spring, at closing time, the shop on Delancey glowed yellow against the dusk. The new sign said, "Second Skin," in Sasha's lettering, and under it, smaller, Volkov Foundation for Reconstructive Arts, because there were 3 artists working Sundays now, and none of them got paid in casseroles anymore. The window still had the sparrow with one wing bigger than the other. There was a clause in the deed about that sparrow now. It could never be painted over. It was, as far as anyone knew, the only mural in America protected by mafia law. Inside, the last client was gone, and the air smelled of green soap and orange oil, and the pepperoni pizza cooling on the counter, and Milo Bell, 9 years old, was standing on a step stool with his tongue between his teeth, supervising. "You're gripping it like a hammer again," Milo said sternly. "Mom says the machine's a pencil, not a hammer." "Your mother," said Dmitri Volkov, hunched over the workbench in his shirt sleeves, wave tattoo rolling down his forearm, as he angled the buzzing machine with the tortured concentration of a man diffusing a bomb. "Has 20 years of practice. I have had 4 Tuesdays." On the bench in front of him, held steady in his scarred left hand, sat a grapefruit, its dimpled peel wearing a wobbly, heart-breaking, absolutely crooked outline of a small bird with one wing bigger than the other. He set the needle down. He turned the grapefruit toward the light. The wing was terrible. It was the best thing he had ever made. From the doorway, Sasha watched them, her boys, the feared man and the fearless one, their heads bent together over a piece of fruit, and she didn't say anything because her hands were happy, and so without noticing, she had already started to hum. Dmitri went still, the way he always did, the way he would do for the rest of his life, letting the sound land. Then he held the grapefruit up toward her across the shop, crooked bird and all, like a man presenting a crown. "Look, sweetheart," he said, "I made a scar on purpose. If this story stayed with you, make sure you're subscribed, because next time, everyone mocked the curvy night shift interpreter at the Volkov hospital wing, until the dying Yakuza patient whispered his last confession, and she was the only soul in the building who understood every word. You won't want to miss it."